gamers. Today we're gonna do the English guide, the English 2TC guide. I still have the English Season 1 guide and Season 2 guide. One is the Russian Castle and one is the Heavy Feudal Aggression. Those are still usable even in this season. So they are technically old guides, but they're still usable. And I also have everything you need to know about English, which goes into detail explaining everything that English Civ has. So I would probably suggest watching that one first. But today I'm going to teach you guys how to do the English 2TC build in Season 3. So I know there's some builds out there already. 2TC is not really new. It's been existing for a while. But this is kind of like the updated 2TC version and what I like to do with it. And I think it's pretty good. It's pretty good. So let's get started. So the first thing we will be doing, I'll switch this to the workers so you guys can see. You're going to put 7 workers on the food. And then you will go with 3 workers onto the gold. You're going to build a house, obviously. You're going to build the gold right here. And you're going to have 3 workers in gold, 7 in food until you start aging up. Obviously, you do scouting as usual. Why is the AI killing wolves? As Delhi. Okay. And after you have 7 and 3, you're going to be rallying onto the wood, build a lumber camp, and from here on out, you're going to be rallying workers onto the wood line until you hit feudal and a bit later as well, which you'll see in a little bit. Once you do have enough resources to age up, you're going to pull the 3 workers from gold and 1 extra from food. So you're going to have 4 workers on the age up. You can go with 3 if that's what you like, but I personally prefer 4. It gives you a little bit of a faster age up and you can put pressure on your opponent. There we go. One thing to note is never put your landmark in the back because that's where you want your farms to be, or even on the side. You don't want to be putting your farms forward, so that's where you want your landmark to be. So a lot of people that I watch and see, they put their landmark like here, and you can put 2 layers of farms basically in this position, which is pretty safe. We're going to build a house, and like I said, we're just going to be rallying onto the wood line. Now, once we build a second house, this is where the build differentiates a bit based on what civ you see. So you can see my wood is increasing. It's about to be 150. And if you're playing against a knight civ, so this is like French or Rus, you will be making a barracks the moment you have 150 wood. If you're playing against a civ that does not have knights, you can skip the barracks. It's not super important, or you can go barracks either way. If you're playing against like Abbasid or you know, another civ, doesn't matter, like Ottomans that does not have knights, they will go horsemen to defend your longbows. So you can go barracks just to force out like horsemen and archers, but it's not needed. So what I want to do with this, as you can see, this is opening like a normal aggression build. But what I'm going to be doing with this is make a couple of units and then making a TC later. So I mentioned this already earlier. There are 2 TC builds out there, but they basically do 2 TC in a like without any units, 4 workers and food, just full second TC, and you can get a second TC about like 440 with English if you play like that. But then you're put on the defensive because you made no units, and then the opponent has all the aggression and you're kind of stuck in your base. With this build, you open up with aggression, so you force the opponent to be defensive and then allow yourself to have a second TC pretty safely. Plus, you force your opponent to make units, and you can, even if they are going for a second TC too, if you do the build like this, they will be forced to make more units than you. Because whoever is the aggressor, so if I make 5 longbows, I can stop making units, but the opponent might not scout that you're not making more units, so they might overcommit, and then you get a TC, and then you're ahead. So once these buildings finish, we're going to put 4 back onto the food, so we have 10 total. And from here on out, what I like to do is make a couple of spearmen, a couple of longbows, and just go for a push with a scout as well. I don't usually make a tower here. You can commit if you want a little bit more, but because this is a 2TC build, I would advise like 2-3 spearmen, 4 or 5 longbows is more than enough to put some serious pressure on your opponent, because it's amount of units that requires a serious response. Like they can't just defend that with, you know, 3 horsemen. They gotta make quite a bit more. And behind that, the moment we have like whatever amount of units you want, right? I think I went 2 spearmen here and like 4 or 5 longbows. Yeah, I'm making a second spearman now. We leave 4 workers on the food. We have 10 total on wood. And then we're going to be rallying onto the stone and move 6 workers from food onto the stone, so we can get that second TC. So in the front, what I like to do, the main idea behind this is to force your opponent to make units, force your opponent to react to you, because if they don't, they're going to take damage, and you're not investing a lot. Like, this is very, very low amount of units, as you can see. It's 4 longbows and 2 spearmen, so that's not a big investment for you, but they need to make stables or archer range or both. They gotta make a knight plus archers to defend this, so it's a lot more cost efficient for you. So even though you attack, even if they defend you and you lose all the units, you forced out production buildings, which is kind of the point of this. You reduce their, you know, castle tech up or second TC or whatever else. And again, the opponent doesn't know how many units you will make unless they're on point with the scouting, so they might overmake units and overinvest. So right now we got 10 on wood. I'm remaking the lumber camps, making another house, and the moment you have enough resources, you're gonna go for second TC, so I'm gonna speed that up. And there we go. I got enough. Now, where to put the second TC? So if you play like civs like French or Abbasid, you always put the second TC on food. If you play English, you have 2 options. You can go for deer. I showed you the deer variation here. But you can also put your second TC. Another spot would be that's good would be here, because then I would secure the gold, I would secure the berries, and I have an easy rally point onto the berries. So if I make it here, I can, you know, send villagers on food action and rally into the gold. So the rally point is very close. The reason why you don't need to go on deer as English is because you can make farms extremely early, and then you're keeping everything safe and you know, tight around your base, and you don't have to worry about dying or something like that. Putting a TC here is more exposed, so if you're playing against French, I would probably not suggest this, but if you're playing against a more passive civ, maybe like Abbasid, that's not necessarily going to have you know, knights or rams extremely early, I don't mind this because deer will give you a higher food income. But then the issue of that is, you can see this deer pack is pretty far away from everything. So if I make it here, once the deer are gone, if I rally back onto the base, that's a long travel time, and that's resources lost, right? If the deer pack was here, I would 100% say go for the TC on the deer pack, because then you can just rally onto the wood here. It's super close, it's super nice. But yeah, that's something you can test. If you go for the deer, then obviously you're going to have enough food income for a while, so you can delay the farms. If you want to make a TC on the gold right here, once the sheep are close to being like done, you will have to make farms pretty early. So TC is going down there. And now what you want to do, there are 2 options from here on out. From the moment you place TC, there are 2 options. You're either going to make units or you're going to rush castle. There's no third option. There's no in between. There's no, you know, I'm going to do a little bit of that, a little bit of this. It's always better to focus on one thing than slowly do something. So at this point, if you're making units, it's good to continuously make units. Not make like 3 longbows and do another push, right? That doesn't make sense. You should either continue making units or you should make units to defend and go castle. So, when do you rush castle? This is completely playstyle based, in my opinion. Like, if you think you won't die by the enemy push, if you think that you don't need to attack, and you would prefer to play English in castle because you can go knights or you can go chatted arms that are super buffed, then what I would suggest doing is leave 10 on wood, and then put 1 TC on gold, 1 TC on food, and then just, you know, slowly build up resources and you'll get to castle. The reason why you would still want 10 on wood, by the way, is because you still need to build, you know, possibly walls, you need to build farms, and you do want to transition out of this slowly to make sure that you don't end up in a situation where you just completely run out of food and you're like, oh, I gotta build 40 farms. So slowly adding farms is always a good idea. And you'll have some wood for the longbows if needed. If you want to be aggressive or continue making units, this is the... I showed that in this example. So I'm building a TC here, and this TC is going to be rallied on food. This TC will be rallied onto the wood. You can see right here, I'll start adding some farms. So like I said, in this variation, I'm going to show you making units in feudal and kind of continuing to either defend or fight. I do put 3 on gold. That's one thing to notice. When my TC finishes, I put 3 on gold. Even though I plan to stay in feudal, because there's a lot of upgrades that I want to get, right? I want to get wheelbarrow, I want to get horticulture, I want to get double broadaxe, I want to get blacksmith upgrades. So I don't want to put 10 on gold, right? Because that's too much. I don't want to put, even 5 is too much, because making out of 2 TCs and making units will require a lot of food. So you do need to be careful about that. Like, you don't want to put too many on gold. I'm slowly getting farms here. I'm gonna get a blacksmith in a moment, and I'm gonna start worker production, or sorry, unit production in a second. There we go. It has started. I'm getting a blacksmith, and you can see my worker distribution right now. At about 20 on food is good enough to sustain 2 TC, 2 production buildings. So I will rally this TC back into the wood in a little bit. I'm just trying to get the food count up, because right now it's barely producing. You can see right now I'm not producing spearmen or longbows. It's barely producing because I'm just missing that extra little income. Now, the question is, which upgrade do you get first? That completely depends. So, if my opponent, this is the way I think, right? If my opponent is playing super passive, like they're playing China, let's say, and they're just doing their own TC boom as well, what I would probably do is slowly start moving out on the map, bring a worker to build a tower, right? And I would probably get eco upgrades behind this. The reason why I would get eco upgrades is China boom is very strong, obviously, so I would want to make sure that I'm keeping up with the economy. So maybe I would get wheelbarrow, horticulture, and double broadaxe, and then I would get +1, right? If you're not being too aggressive. If you're being defensive, like the French players pushing you, you definitely don't want to be getting eco upgrades, because that's crazy, right? You got to defend. So I would probably get steeled arrow and iron undermash if they have their own archers first, and then I would get eco upgrades. If I'm playing against Abbasid, but I'm doing really well, like I'm picking off workers here and there, I would probably skip eco upgrades and go for the steeled arrow into maybe siege engineering and try to win the game. So which upgrade you get first with gold depends kind of where in the game you are at, and if you're playing defensively, if you're playing aggressively, and so on and so forth. I would say probably the safest option would be to get steeled arrow, but if you think that the game might go longer, that you can't kill your opponent, I would definitely suggest getting the eco upgrades first. But if you plan to fight like in the next minute, or you see that the opponent is making a lot of units, getting steeled arrow is never a bad option, right? It's a good thing to have. So now I have 2021 on food, and what I'm doing now is I'm changing the rally point onto the wood with both TCs, because you can see I'm producing now, and I have more food than I need, so that's great. And now we need more wood so I can constantly produce longbows, because they take 7 seconds to build. I'm getting +1 steeled arrow. In a second I'm gonna get, I think I get wheelbarrow next, if I'm not mistaken. In this game, yeah, I get wheelbarrow, so you can do something like that. Obviously, if the AI doesn't have, I mean the game's over. If the AI doesn't have like archers or enemy, sorry, not AI, you can also skip the arrow armor, because you only get arrow armor if they're going archers themselves. But if they're going like pure knight or horseman, for I don't know why they would do that, you can skip the arrow armor upgrade. But in general, +1 attack is always good. So where do you go from there? Like, when do you transition? This is a question I always get. When do you transition to castle? AOE4 is a very like fluent game, and you can't say like, okay, you make 10 spearmen, 15 longbow, and then you go castle. That completely depends, right? Like I said, if you're getting all in, you just keep making units, and eventually you can counter push. There's no need to rush castle. I don't know, unless the opponent is rushing castle, but then you can also put pressure on them and get a delayed castle. In general, with English, it's good to make units as long as you think you can do damage. if you get to the opponent's base and you have army around their base and you feel like, okay, if I make rams, I can't win, I can't push anymore, then going to castle is a good idea. You can just rally your TCs onto the gold and you will slowly build up enough food to go there. If you're having too much wood, you can always take 8 workers from wood and you can, you know, just build a mill and farms around it. But it's very simple. Like whenever you decide to transition to castle, you just rally TCs onto the gold or switch some workers from wood onto the gold, and it'll slowly get there. The only civ I would not suggest doing this build against is probably HRE. In the current meta, in the lower leagues, at the higher leagues we've seen a lot more double TC, and I also recently made a guide for HRE double TC, so maybe you'll see that in the lower leagues as well. But in general, HRE likes to rush castle, and if you do 2 TC build, it's a little bit too slow, and the opponent might be in castle by the time your second push starts rolling. So that's something to be careful of, and I would probably advise you to use one of the first 2 season builds against it, or just do this build, but instead of second TC, just put more pressure. You know, instead of opening 2 spear, 5 longbows, just go like, you know, 5 spear, 15 longbows to put some serious pressure on their gold, and then do second TC. And then instead of making a second push after, just go into castle, right? Other than HRE, any other civ, you can do this build just fine. This build is really good against French, because French has a hard time pushing into English TCs because of the, you know, the network of castles buff. But also English TCs are like machine guns, they're very, very fast. So yeah, overall, I think it's a pretty solid build. I know that, you know, last season we've seen a lot of like 2 TC, even 3 TC builds, and that kind of died down. But now 2 TCs are coming back into fashion a little bit, so I think you'll see more of those, especially because a lot of my guides are going to be 2 TC, and I think a lot of people will probably, you know, try them out. So we're getting the meta back into the normal gameplay. Anyway, if you're watching this on YouTube, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. The next guide I will be most likely making is Delhi Tower Victory Guide. I've done 2 Delhi guides that are focused on normal gameplay, like Dome of Faith. One is the update to the first one. So I figured Delhi hasn't changed much in regarding Dome of Faith, so I'm going to make Tower of Victory Guide and explain why it's good and which maps you should play it on and against which civs. Once again, if you're watching YouTube, thanks so much for watching. If you're watching on Twitch, let's keep going.